friends! I am the Dungeon Tutor. Welcome! Today I'm answering a question, the second question from RPG a Day, which we will do every day for August. And today's question is, well, not so much of a question. It's first RPG Game Master. Game Master being the operative word. And in this particular case, I'm actually going to go back into the day with my very first RPG Game Master. Now, my game path is a little rocky as, well, Dungeons & Dragons came out the year and the month that I was born. So, obviously, I didn't start from the very beginning. I am right along there, though, with that 50th anniversary coming up, and believe me, I'm feeling that. But I did get started a bit later. My first experience with Dungeons & Dragons was reading. I read the core box set Dungeons & Dragons. Didn't understand it at the time because I was 8, and there were all of those abbreviations and things. I got all confused. Plus, of course, there's the simple fact that in original Dungeons & Dragons, you could be a 6th level wizard casting a 6th level spell at a 6th level creature in the 6th level of a dungeon. It got complicated because they kept using the same word over and over again, and again, who has time to figure out what all the XPs, GPs, EPs, etc. meant? I was 8. I loved the stories, I loved the monsters and the old school illustrations and everything. I enjoyed it. Fast forward a bit till I was in my teen years and still in high school. Well, our high school and middle school were conjoined in the tiny town I came from, but still. I met a guy who had similar interests to me. He was also interested in role-playing. I was probably a lot more interested at the time in games and gaming in general, like game books I loved, like Joe Dever's Lone Wolf and Gray Star and Highway Warriors or something like that. I really enjoyed J.H. Brennan's Grail Quest series. I enjoyed Gygax's Sagard the Barbarian. You know, there were a lot of really good ones out there. But the thing about those is there's no game master. You are doing a solo role-playing game at best. And it's not as satisfying as a role-playing game because you're not saying anything, you're not doing anything, you're just making a couple of decisions to cause the branching path to pick one or the other, and that's it. And of course there's a little bit of combat dice rolling in the better of those games, but realistically it comes down to, do you succeed and continue, or do you die? And then you don't get to continue anymore in most of those combats, so you have to start over again. So really, the combats are kind of foolish when there's no game master watching you. You can succeed at every single one of them, no matter what the odds are, because you'll eventually just brute force your way through it if you have to keep reading, getting back to the same point again and again and again. It's kind of an odd construct, but, you know, we did that. I understand where solo role-playing games come from, to a certain extent, wanting a role-playing experience without having other people, but game books were probably a better experience than any solo RPG I've found so far, but not as creative as many of them can be. So, first Game Master, right. First Game Master were all the authors of those books, kind of, but not really. The first person that I found that would be a Game Master for me was a friend that I met at high school named Gary. He and I both were interested in games and gaming. We were interested in the Nintendo Entertainment System, which we both had, and all the different games and stuff, and eventually the topic came around to role-playing games. And around that time I got the Red Box Dungeons & Dragons set, so I was running games in my head. I was making dungeons and characters and trying to force my brothers to play with me, which didn't work very well because they weren't as cerebral. They were okay with video games and they were okay with going out and playing some sort of a sports game or something, but when it comes to rolling dice and acting, that didn't work. So that was fairly unsatisfying, even though it left me with a stack of stuff that I had made, all of which, by the way, is now destroyed thanks to my father, who I left my stuff with, taking on foster kids who treated my stuff like toilet paper. So all my stuff is destroyed from my first days, which so I'm not terribly traumatized by it, but it's kind of sad. At any rate, so this friend that I made in high school also liked role-playing games, and we talked a bit about it, and we for a little bit ran games with each other. My friend's name was Gary, nice guy. And he was my first game master. I was also his game master when I would run the game, and we took turns. One player and one game master is not optimal. You want more people. Most games are bent to a certain amount of dependency on other people. Like if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, soloing as a wizard is really, really hard. Almost always. You just don't have the resources to take on whatever. You would have to constantly be hiring people to stand in front of you so you can make your magics and lean on them when a fight isn't worth your magics or something like that. That wasn't great, but we figured out things. We made it work, as people have since probably the beginning of role-playing games, not having enough people. You know, with hirelings and stuff, you can do it. But he was my first. We didn't do the deepest and most enriching games. My first real game master, when I had a group to play with, was in high school. I fell in with a group who was very interested in Dungeons and Dragons, and they'd been playing for a bit. One of them was a classmate of mine. Another one was a senior. One was a junior while I was a freshman. And then we had a couple of younger brothers and sisters. They were fine folk. Fine folk. I enjoyed that group quite a bit. I made my first Advanced Dungeons and Dragons character in that, who was a lawful good cleric. And we had the two older of the group actually were the game masters. They traded off. When one was DMing, he was the DM, but when he was playing, he was a cavalier. The other one played a magic user when he wasn't dungeon mastering. And it was a great time. We were actually going through some of the classic Dungeons & Dragons modules, one after the other, which I know some people say leads to kind of murder hobo behavior, and I'm not going to say that isn't entirely true, but there was genuine role-playing there. I did consider my character's outlook and perspective whenever I got a chance to roleplay, which we did do some roleplay. Not as much as I do now. This was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons after all, and we were kind of in it for the challenge of the game and stacking up against the monsters and challenges of the game. But there was some role-playing. It was still good. And we got through several. I can't remember all of them. I know we got through River Death. We went through the original Castle Ravenloft, which was a trip. We did Drums on Fire Mountain, which we speed ran. That was fun. Yeah, I can't remember all of them, but Saber River, I think, comes up in my mind as a particularly nasty one we carved our way through. But all things eventually pass, and eventually that group kind of broke up, and I went to another school after my freshman year, where I played a lot of role-playing games. I went to a seminary where I played a lot of role-playing at the time before getting kicked out. And just didn't have the same flow after that for role-playing games until I got to college. And then in college, that's when I went, really into gaming and made some fast friends through gaming that I still have to this day. So, but yeah, Gary was my first. I think I could say pretty confidently that that is the case. And after that, even though they'll probably never see this, the other game masters that I had for the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game, Stu and Tim, were great. They both did their own things really well, and ran some of the finer adventures that I ever played. So it was a good time. So thank you very much for tuning in, friends. I am the Dungeon Tutor, and this is a little bit of my life, and I hope you enjoyed that story. Going forward, we will continue doing this. Of course, this is only the second day, so we've got plenty more to do. And I do hope to see you again. I hope that if you enjoyed this, you've liked and subscribed. If you have anybody who wants to know what those first steps feel like and getting to play with other people, those were my experiences, and they may very well parallel something you yourself may have experienced, and maybe they just put a little smile on your face. I certainly hope so. I do want to entertain with these videos, and maybe, if somebody is just waiting to come out of their shell and join a group, this might give you some insight on what that feels like. But, at any rate, I do hope that you enjoyed it enough to come back. And if you do, I hope that in the time between then and now, you come back to see another one of my videos, you, yes, you, have had a chance to roll some dice, play some games, have some fun, and stay safe out there, my friends. Until next time, farewell.